really appreciate the discussion that we're having, particularly on the focus on national security. I think we all recognize that the world is a very, very volatile place right now. A lot of focus here in the capital on what is happening in Iran, and we've heard the discussion about the added oomph that sanctions are able to play when we've got more flexibility here. I had a meeting yesterday with General Breedlove, who is head of the European Command, and it was a discussion about Arctic issues and the role that my state plays in that from a military perspective. But it was an interesting discussion in talking with him. We had a map that was entitled Russia's Arctic Push, and it just kind of details from a military perspective what we're seeing coming out of Russia. And the conversation turned to some of the comments that have been coming out of late in armed services, in defense appropriations, about where the threats are right now. And when General Dempsey suggests that perhaps the biggest threat in front of us right now is not what we're seeing out of Iran, but what is potentially coming from Russia with a threat to European security, it does cause us, I think, to look, again, very critically at how we deal with Mr. Putin, how we deal with these national security threats. And we don't have the resources, the men and women to put the boots on the ground, to be able to do what we would like to do from a defense perspective. So we have to look to what other tools we have. And one of the tools that we have, clearly, are our resources. So with our oil resources, it just, to me, it is such an important part of this discussion here. So again, I appreciate what we have heard there. Mr. Pasquale, I want to ask you a question about, and this was probably take you back to your time when you were the energy envoy and there at the State Department with the Bureau of Energy Resources. And the question to you is whether or not you heard from other nations requests to the United States to open up our oil markets to them. And the reason I ask is there wasn't too many years ago when we here in this country were crying foul when China was withholding critical minerals, rare earth elements that Japan very desperately wanted, and China in very much a power play said, no, we're not going to be sending anything your way. It causes me to wonder if other nations are viewing us that way, that, well, you're okay in encouraging us to get our oil from a coercive supplier like Russia, but why wouldn't you be willing to help us out, United States? Can you lend me your experience in the position that you were in, whether you had any of those discussions with other countries?
Chairman, thank you. It was an issue that arose constantly. I'll give you a couple of examples. In India, when we were negotiating with India to diversify its energy resources to reduce its imports from Iran, one of the first questions it asked was, where do I get the alternative supply? Where can I go? And why will not the United States put more oil on the international market and give us the opportunity to benefit from that? Or even if they aren't importing oil from the United States directly, to have the supply impact that we might have had through our exports so that they might be able to buy more cheaply, oil more cheaply elsewhere. In Turkey, again, very similar issues came up with the refiners. And one of the questions they asked was, where do we go for the alternative supply? And why are you putting us in a situation where we're going to have to become more dependent on Russian oil? In Europe, the issue consistently came up of why will not the United States open up its market for export? And indeed, it has become a central issue in the TTIP negotiations. With China, again, another major question, and there was a certain irony here. Here, the United States, over 3 decades, had been after China to eliminate its restrictions on the export of resources, including rare earths. And when they were looking for more supplies internationally, we had to say we had restrictions on critical commodities in the United States. It's those kinds of restrictions that, in the end, affect American credibility. And in the moment when we have to put through an important policy, makes it much more difficult to negotiate. We're able to succeed in these cases because there was an opportunity to show countries why diversification of their imports away from Iran was in their national security interest. It was not an easy negotiation. We would have served our interest by having much more flexibility.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation there. Senator Kent.